notes from a speech that I made several years ago. I was asked to speak at the B. Billings History Day. I think it was the first one they ever had, and most of you remember B, I think. She was an historian. She was my Girl Scout leader. Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah, she was my Girl Scout leader. And then who else was I thinking of just a while ago? No, whatever. Anyway, the history of that I told on B. Billings History Day was just how I grew up here. I only lived here from the age of 10 because my stepfather was from the area we moved here. And this has just been my hometown because I don't know that much about my real hometown. I remember all the characters of town that we all thought as old people, and now we are those old people. So, and I mentioned a lot of individuals like B and different people who, probably Jane remembers, who worked at Humphrey's drugstore, Lola Brown and Ellie Patty, like that. Did you go to Humphrey's?
Oh gosh, yes.
I don't know if you did or not.
Yes.
And that was a place where we went for sodas after school to hang out. And if it was a day that the dorm students were leaving, they were all hanging out there with their suitcases to get on the bus to go. But that's what you remember from small town life. You know, where you went for a soda, or who worked there and what they did. And I remember coming here, of course, and I had to be careful about what books I chose because Bessie Libby was quite opinionated that you could only look at certain books. And does your mother know what you're reading? I remember her saying that to me. So, and all the Nancy Drew books were right behind the librarian's desk at that time. So that was safe territory to get in there and get Nancy Drew out. So those are little, I don't know, snippets, I guess, of local history when I was growing up. I went to the Lancey House. We used to go in the Lancey House after the movies and call my mother, collect, because it was a toll call from the paid phone booth. So you call collect, because that's when they came to pick us up. So there's all those little things. So when I grew up spending a lot of time with older relatives, and they would talk about horse and wagons and high button shoes and long skirts. I have pictures of them in those and things like that. So I guess I appreciated older times because I spent so much time with them. And then I was fortunate enough to kind of inherit Grammy Libby's postcards. And Grammy Libby was my husband's grandmother. She was Etta Mae Nelson. And of course you remember this summer we honored her because she was a mail carrier for about 3 years, 1903 to 1906. So, you know, I've kind of chronicled some of her history. I wrote this piece that was used in the ceremonies, and I forgot what I was going to say. But, and I've interviewed some family relatives that about what they remember about her, and I haven't got it all put together. But that's my goal. I just never imagined I would be so interested in history growing up, but I always had a good memory, so I remembered different things that older people told me. And then I started piecing it all together for individual histories and for my personal history, genealogy. Somebody in 1970, a man in Ohio, a Seekins, did a published Seekins genealogy. It was fascinating. And think of it, back in 1970, he had no internet. He went to these places and he did all this research. So I have that, and I've entered that into my database and I've added to it. I've made connections all over the country. I mean, even Alaska, we have Seekins in Alaska too. And I've tried to write that up in different forms, but it's 500 pages now, so I don't think I'll be doing that with that. But, I just am a person who remembers details of different things that other people don't often remember sometimes. I put this book together 25 years ago, and I tried to update Sanger's history from what I remembered from 25 years, and then I also had Dwight Dougherty do the editing for me on that, which was fun, because he added a few things that I didn't have straight and didn't remember. So there is a synopsis of Pittsfield history in that book that we did. I don't know what I can tell you about, I don't even know how I happened to come across this Images of America series. except I inquired about it. They obviously got back to me with some information, and they use about 200 pictures in their books, and they have books all over Maine, all over the country now for Images of America, and they use about 200 pictures and small captions. And the second book that I did, Around Great Moose Lake, I got a really snippy editor. I don't know what her problem was. She had worked on the other book, but she had stepped up in her position. She was much fussier about my writing or something. I don't understand what it was, but I feel fortunate that I had good history lessons, good English lessons from MCI. Said I did well with Mrs. Wickham, remember her? And then there was Mr. Bradshaw and Mr. Gillis.
We'll just ask questions.
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned that knowing about Edda, that's actually what prompted you to write the book's Dusker
I
Valley.
was fortunate enough to get her postcards, and I just thought, what a shame. We have all these old pictures of Pittsfield, and no good way to. We talked one time about framing them and putting them on the wall in our family room or something, but there's so many of them, you couldn't do them justice, and you wouldn't be able to see the backs. So you didn't have the whole story there. And I came across one of these books someplace and looked into it, and I guess it took me a while, but yeah, I got them to agree. They wanted a population base of 10,000, so I couldn't have done it on just Pittsfield at the time. I think their guidelines may have changed since then, but they wanted a population base of 10,000. That's why it's Sebastopol Valley, and it's 6 towns. And I, of course, went around, and because I was a reporter, I had all these connections in these towns that I'd covered, and I knew some of the old people and some of the people who knew old people, and we collected a pretty good collection of pictures, I think. And there's still some new ones out there. I'm active with Heartland Historical Society now. We've found tons. And there is somebody who knows that history far better than I do. And he has done a website, so that's a good thing. But yeah, I just thought there was a way to share this. And I don't remember, somebody had done a book, I think it was around Ripley, and they included Dexter and Ripley in it. And so I thought, wait a minute, Ripley's not very big, so I can do Heartland St. Albans. And we ended up doing Heartland St. Albans, Palmyra, and no, not Palmyra, Heartland St. Albans, Athens, right, Athens. They had finally moved up to digital copies, so I could digitize everything and send it. Because I really felt bad borrowing all these postcards from people and pictures from all over these small towns and sending them off to North Carolina, I think it is, South Carolina, and thinking, oh my goodness, what if I lose them, But they all came back, and I got them all back to the right people and all, so I guess I did well there. But I did feel better when I could just scan them and return them. And that's the benefit now of the portable scanners, which I happen to have also. When you want to copy a picture, we frequently copy pictures for people with Heartland Historical and put it on the website. And you don't have to surrender your pictures. You don't have to give them to anybody. Let me copy it, and we'll have a copy. You have your picture back. So that worked out a lot better. So.
Where would you suggest we start? I know it would have been good if I'd started 20 years ago when a lot of the generation above me was still alive, but now they're not.
Yeah, well, I did the same thing. I spent this time with these elderly relatives, and I remember some of the things they told me, but not enough. And even with my mother-in-law, her stories were told over and over and over.
And we still don't remember
We still
them.
don't remember them. With Donna's grandmother. But I do remember a few things, and I have tried to write down a few things, but that's it. I worked with Denny Ledoux I took his class. He used to have a week-long workshop program, and he wrote Turning Memories into Memoirs. This is an older edition, and he does the Memoir Network now. You could find that online, and he puts out a weekly newsletter and all. But his concept is writing stories, and he had us write a whole series of stories. And I still haven't gotten comfortable writing a story that somebody has told me and then kind of fictionalizing it, putting dialogue in that maybe wasn't the true dialogue. I mean, yes, we did that. We put dialogue in because it sounded like the person and basically what they said. But I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So I haven't done a lot of it. I got some stories. But the genealogy, ancestry is big on saying start with yourself. Start with yourself, your parents, their grandparents, your grandparents, their grandparents, and keep going back. And once you start, somebody's already done something somewhere. And I won't tell you that I've done it and documented everything the way a lot of genealogists do, because I haven't. I have gone through and borrowed from different books and listings and things that people have done, and I've attributed what they've done, that sort of thing. Because somewhere along the line you'll find out that you got misinformation. You got to go correct it. So in my program, I use Legacy because it's free. You can download it, and I upgraded to the deluxe, so I have bought it. And I think I started with Family Tree Maker, but that got too expensive or something. But you know, it's ways to put it in. They give you ideas on how to do things, what to look for. I'm not the great genealogist because, like I said, I don't document everything. I take basic information and let somebody else use it if they need it more documented or whatever they're doing. But then I wasn't happy with just the names and dates because I started hearing the stories and started figuring out that, you know, my ancestors must have known my husband's ancestors and that sort of thing. So that's when I started looking into memoir and writing stories. So yes, I have a notebook at home and on my computer as well. I have documented memories that I have of my grandmother, of great aunts and great uncles. I had a great uncle that he was probably 75, close to 80 years old, and I was probably 6 or 7. He'd go out and play baseball with me. He had an old Ford pickup that I loved, right? And you could crank the windshield open. And he got rid of it, and he got a GMC. I thought that was a terrible thing to do, but it's a memory that I have of doing things with him. And I remember my great aunt telling me about her wedding day, and I know where she was married because I lived there later. But it wasn't someplace somebody would get married. It was silly, and they came by horse and wagon 2 blocks over, and they were causing such a ruckus the people who were still at the wedding could hear them. And there's no way, this was in Camden, there's no way 2 blocks over in Camden you'd hear somebody making a ruckus today. So it's just little things like that I try to record to pass on to whoever's interested, because right now there aren't a lot of people interested. I've told several of my grandchildren that they have Salem witches in their background, and they go to school on the day that they're studying Salem witches, and they say, yeah, I got one, you know, that's about it. And they have no further interest. I guess the reason I do as much as I do is because I'm just driven to do that. I'm driven to collect. What did I say? There was a gentleman that I talked to. He used to run a local historical society. He's long since dead. But he would tell me that children would come in to look through the museum. And you know how kids are. They go through, they look at all the old stuff. Maybe they ask a question or something. A week later, they don't know what they saw. But there's always one, he said, there's always one that will ask questions, that will be curious about something, that will come back, that might even volunteer later on. He said, that's the one I do it for. That's the one kid who has that interest that wants to know more. So I guess I was one of those kids. I am just driven to collect and remember and write it down, because I can write it down. And people always say, oh, I can't do that. I can't write anything. And I tell everybody, you can write. Whether you think you're a writer or not, write it down. Tell me a story. Write yourself a letter. Write your grandchildren a letter. I did a project a few years ago. I did a cookbook of family favorites for my family. And I put in some of the favorite recipes that we've had, some of the recipes that have been handed down, and I put the stories with them, why they were handed down, where they came from, that sort of thing. And I have pictures of my grandchildren making some of these recipes. So yeah, that's a different type of memoir, but it's a way to remember some things and save your memories. Turning memories into memoirs, Denny is big on memory lists. And he will invite people to make a memory list. Just write down every memory you remember. I mean, maybe it's just having cranberry juice instead of orange juice in the morning, but maybe it's, walking to school 5 miles or whenever. But make a list, and eventually you will find the stories that piece all those things together, or it will prompt you to remember a story that you want to tell, that you want to relay to your grandchildren.